Good evening, everyone, and welcome to chat number 2. And so how is everyone today? Whilst I'm waiting for you to type all that in, assignment 1, the marking guide is now released, and I'm trying to chase up assignment 2 because I know some of you have finished assignment 1 and might like to get a start with assignment 2. So I'm hoping that that will be approved either tomorrow or Friday. So that's where the real assignment starts. Okay, I'm just rearranging my windows. Everything ready. Okay, so I've had a check. I think we're up to about 55% of students have got something online. So there's maybe a little bit of editing to do, and some of the images aren't coming through. But yeah, very good response. So I just want to congratulate you all on completing the first lab and perhaps some of lab 2. And in this week's tute, let me just fit that. We're going to have a look at the HTML inside typical web pages, but I think I'd just like to continue with lab number 2, just in case anyone has got any questions regarding the lab this week. So to date, I've had someone whose A4 directory didn't contain a bookings.txt spreadsheet. And if you haven't got a bookings.txt spreadsheet in there, it is quite easy to create one and just copy the header from the Git repository. So I'll just show you where that is. So yeah, this was a question somebody asked. Apparently bookings.txt didn't come through, but it's quite easy to sort of download. You can just select the text, copy it, and put it into a new file. But if for some reason this file hasn't come down, I'm not quite sure why that is. So just have a little look out for it. It's not a big deal if it hasn't, but I'm just curious how many students this has affected. So the main thing this week is to make sure that your real assignment content is not viewable on the internet. So the htaccess file that I've got down here, and I'll make this maybe a little bit bigger. So this is just text, and one of the reasons why I've got it in a file is so that there's no hidden characters that will stop it from working. And what it does is sets up a kind of connection to the Kerberos authentication server, and it's located as part of RMIT's internal networks. So if this file ends up being on your laptop or desktop, it will give you a server 500 error. Okay, so Matthew, that's good to see. So what this does is this should only ever be on your core teaching machine, and I have set up GitHub to ignore this file, but there is a chance that sometimes it might come down to your desktop or your laptop, in which case just get rid of it and that server 500 error will go away. So I've got some statements here. This is what's important. You just need to replace this number with your student ID. And if you're working with someone, you can give them access to your directory to read the code and to make sure the code is working just by putting their student number here. And this is what's very important. This is what allows staff members to access your account. So anyone with an E number or who logs in with an E number can also view your code. So this might be a bit unfortunate. I'm guessing cleaners can theoretically log in, but what is important is markers can log in. So I don't need to worry about asking everyone to add a new staff member if we get a new staff member to mark accounts. So when you do this, okay, I'm going to just switch back to normal mode. So I'm just doing a bit of a sort on alphabetical order here. Okay, so this is how things are looking. So what I get to see with this script is how everyone's going without looking at their page initially. So I've got 3 people here who have protected their A1 directory, and I'm quite happy. Well, what they've done is they've protected the WP directory, which is okay. But what this means is the protections for A2, A3, and A4 will be exactly the same. So if you want to keep your WP directory protected, that's fine. So I'm just speaking to Taban, Angela, and Jonathan. But what I'm really expecting is that the WP directory is not protected, so I get an OK response, a 200 response, and then a 401 response for any unauthorized attempt. So my page is making an unauthorized attempt. So that means that it's been successfully protected. This number here is how many media assets are available. So I'm seeing a lot of 0 out of 3s. So we're also just checking to make sure that all 3 images that are in the Git repo, the dummy repository that I've created. So in other words, not a repository, it's on core teaching. And this is the other thing, just making sure that all media files have been copied over. But we can have a look at that maybe towards the end of today's class, if you're curious how your assignment's going. Now, I'm also getting one student who's having a problem that the htaccess authentication box is not popping up. The reason why I'm a little bit late today was I was trying to work out if there's anything that's obvious, and then I realized the time. But if you're also suffering from this problem, just have a check on the other servers. Make sure Saturn and Jupyter are also not prompting this authentication box. And but at this stage, I've only had one student saying that this is not working. So hopefully we can get that resolved very shortly. So that's the htaccess file, and the reason why we need the htaccess file is so that your work is protected from other students' eyes. So exercise 2, this is, so Tim's just messaged that he's got images directory in my media directory. So Tim, I think what you're saying is you've got an images folder inside your images folder that is causing problems. So if you're, I'll just have a look for you. Yeah, so at the moment, what I'm getting for you, Timothy Carter, is your homepage is okay. A2 and A3 and A4 are not protected yet, and I've got 0 media files coming through. Now another thing is when you I'm not sure. So Darren's just saying that the HD access copy is not working in A3 and A4. So I might have a look for that. So Darren, is your surname Bell by any chance? If it is, I'm actually seeing OK, 3 unauthorized and 3 out of 3 media. So just on that line item, your website looks like it's been set up correctly. I'd be curious to know what the bugginess looked like, though. So exercise 2, I'm going to raise this just for a security point of view, because I know there are sort of 2 types of people out there. This command here, this basically will store your credentials when you enter them for, say, the first time after you set this configuration. So when you configure your username and email and enter your password, it'll actually remember that you've entered your password, and it will store your password in core teaching. And what this means is that every time you perform a git pull, as per the first lab, you will find that you won't have to enter in your username and password after the second time. And that can be quite handy if you've got a very long password and don't remember it. But I know some people may be a little bit shy about storing their Git password. So I just want to point out that this line is optional if you don't want to type your username and password in every time. So this works when you're in core teaching and typing in git pull commands from the command line. Now this, I think these instructions are slightly out of sequence. Oh yes, no, that makes sense. So it will find that if you've performed some HD access changes, the repository will be aware that those changes are scheduled to be committed. Now, what we want to do, and this is where I say, because we only want the htaccess files on core teaching, we need to create a file called git ignore. Sometimes it exists, sometimes it doesn't. So you can actually just type in touch git ignore, and that's like create a new file. And what we do is we configure this file, because by default there is no git ignore file. So we're telling Git to have a look inside this file called git ignore for any files that we shouldn't be ignoring. And what I'm doing is I'm saying echo, which means put into the file .htaccess on a new line into the file .gitignore. And also one thing that Mac users will enjoy is having little thumbs DB files popping up. We can also ignore those files just in case they start to pop up as well. And once these things are done, then when we do the git add -a or git add star or even git add dot, I'm not sure there's any significant differences between all these versions. Then you can make your first commit. So when you make your first commit, what you're doing is you're committing to changes that you've made in your local repositories. So on core teaching, your local GitHub repository, sorry, your local Git repository will record those changes. And then when you do a Git push, those changes are then pushed up to your personal GitHub account or Bitbucket account, depending on which repository you're using. So I do say here, you will need to enter your GitHub username and password one last time if you're configuring the credentials store. But if not, you'll have to enter your password or username and password in each time. So are there any questions with regards to exercise 2 that I can answer? So Darren's saying you're stuck in a loading loop at the moment. So I'll just have a quick look at your account using a different page. Okay. So Darren, can I get your student ID? Oh, actually, no, I've got it here, I think. Actually, thanks, Darren. It was taking me a while to find it. So I've just popping this into the marker script. So Darren, I'm seeing, do you want me to share this, Darren? I'm just looking at it. It looks like you've done everything. Okay. So this is what a marker will have access to. So I can see, just need to make it a little bit wider. So I can see you've updated your name, which is good. You've even got your student ID in there. I will say that this image doesn't look like it's 200 by 200. So you may have, I can see it's 200 wide. Is that just because that's the best image you've got? I suppose as long as one side is 200, that's okay. And I can see that all 3 media assets have come in and A2 is working. So I'm just clicking A3. So I suspect that there isn't an index.php file in your A3 directory. And let me just check 4. And that's the same. But I'll just go for 4 and see if bookings.txt has come through. Yeah, so it doesn't look like there's any problem. I think there's just no index page in A3 and A4. And that's probably affecting Alexander as well. In fact, Alexander's got an excellent explanation because there's no index.php file in A3 and A4. It's just doing an infinite load. So Benjamin, yep, same issue. Yeah, okay, well, let's just say with the marking guide, as long as one side is 200, that's fine. As square as you can make it. sometimes we're asked to do these things. Okay, so yeah, Ben, that looks like 5 out of 5. I can't see any errors just yet. Okay, so moving on to exercise 3. So this is, if you like, the next stage. And I think I've got something in the assignment that I'd like to share with you. Actually, I'll just go back to last week. Maybe it was the tute. Yep. So last week I was just saying what I'd like you to do is just get this kind of a development model working first. So if you want to sort of dial into core teaching using CyberDuck or WinSCP and just edit the file directly on the core teaching machine and just push changes to your repository. So you got that initial personal clone and then any subsequent updates to your repository. You're more than welcome just to stick with this model for the first couple of weeks. But once you want to progress to having a version on your laptop or desktop, you're going to have like a sort of 3-way communication, and there's a good chance that these 3 will get out of sync at some point. So it's very unlikely you'll ever have a merge conflict if you stick with this, but you are restricted to only being able to develop on core teachings, so i.e. with a working internet connection. But if you want to work offline, sort of in the library or something, you can install a web server on your desktop or laptop, but then you have to be really careful to maintain the repository on all 3 machines. So Alexander, I'm more than happy to check you as well if you want to just pop in your if you want to check pop in your student ID, I'll have a quick check. So back to lab number 2. So the reason why I'm recommending MAMP is because it's quite a user-friendly version of a web server, but there is also WAMP, or the original version of MAMP from Bitnami, which kind of inspired somebody to go away and create their own sort of more friendly version. So this is the link, and it will work for PCs as well as Mac users. So I'm just checking Alexander's page. Yeah, that looks pretty good. The avatar image is missing. So that's just one failed image coming through, Alexander. So you may have misnamed your avatar photo. It may be it might be a JPEG rather than a PNG file. It's often a common problem. So when you install the maybe I should open a Discord channel. Yep, I'll have a look at yours as well, Lockie. So when you've installed a web server, what you'll have is somewhere in your applications or programs directory, there will be a web server. And Okay, so Lockie, your avatar picture is a little larger than 200. In fact, it's so big it's pushed the other ones off the page. A2 doesn't look like it's protected, or A3 or A4 at this stage. So when you set everything up, and usually this link will work, but sometimes port 80, the default port, is not available. So it will configure your website to run on 8080 or even 8888. So those are just the three most common URLs. So when you click on that, that'll actually open up a link on your personal computer. So it's not going to be the same as the one on your desktop or your laptop, but it'll be one of these links. But when you start the server, you can also, when you start the server, it'll often open up the window anyway, and you can see localhost, whatever port it's running on, and you'll get this welcome page, which is, very helpful. But click on this My Website link, and that will take you to your document route. And that can be any website you're working on, not just WP. Now I've got a quick tip for Mac users. I think Windows users and Linux users have this option built in, but for some reason, Apple have decided to protect people from themselves. And if you go into shortcuts, go to services, it's a very obscure place. You can click on this new terminal at folder. And when you do this, when you right click, you do get this option. So whenever you're in a GUI window, you can open a terminal wherever that folder is, rather than opening the terminal program and trying to navigate to that folder via the command line. So when you've done that, and I've got the background of this just to reflect that this is happening on your personal machine, not on Core Teaching. When you type in git clone whatever your personal repository is, you are then cloning the WP repository into your personal web server's root document. And then all of your work will be available from localhost /WP. And if you do get a 500 server error, and that's one thing I want to check, see if anyone's got one of those just yet. Actually, it's Philip Borden here today. Just having a quick scroll. So Philip, if you're watching online, sort of offline, I mean, I've got an internal server error in your A2 directory, but A3 and A4 look like they're protected. So just copy one of the htaccess files back from A3 or A4 back to A2. There's just something wrong with your A2 version, which is quite strange. So so anyway, if you do get a 500 server error, just check that htaccess files have not been downloaded to your personal machine. And if you have, just delete them, and there's a very good chance that you won't see them again. And if they do come back down again, you can keep deleting them. But if they keep appearing, that's usually a sign that exercise 2, where you're ignoring these files, this hasn't actually been set up correctly. So a very common problem. In fact, this even caught me out the other day, and I didn't even think to check to see if I had a htaccess file that was stray. And then exercise 5, installing the brackets Git module into brackets. But if you're using Git Kraken or what did I say, source tree last week. And also, I think Atom also has Git integration. So most IDEs have got Git integration. And I'm just opening up brackets at the moment. So when you complete this exercise, what you'll have is you'll have this, you'll have a little blue thing that pops up inside your sidebar. So that's what brackets looks like normally. And when you install this extension, this will appear. And whenever you're making any changes, I showed a little bit of this last week. So if I then save, the extension is sort of keeps a track of what Git is tracking, and it's able to detect that you've made a change to this file. I don't think I've ever pressed this. Looks like it's grayed out, but I'll just say that it's there. But if you want to put it back the way it was, and then save, it snaps back to where it was. And when you are making a commit, it can give you a summary of all the changes that are going to commit. And this is a lot friendlier than using the command line if you're developing on your personal machine. That is, not developing on core teaching, but just working off a MAMP server on your local machine. So for that reason alone, I recommend coming and installing this plugin, just because it's easier to work out the status of your project. So are there any questions with today's lab? This is a little modification I made last period. Okay, so Nathan's asked a good question, and this can happen a lot. I'm going to open up another page I've prepared. So I think I've got this in the lectures. No. So I'm just going into extra resources. So what I've got here is a sort of simulation of what's going on. So to answer Nathan's question, so what you need to do is you need to perform a Git pull from core teaching. So if there are changes on your GitHub repository online, you would need to say Git pull, and that will pull the changes down to your core teaching machine. So a Git pull combines a Git fetch and a Git merge. So it's like getting two commands rolled into one. So, but it's definitely not a clone. A clone is only when you're doing it for the first time. So that's like a sort of tree planting exercise, a Git clone, and then a pruning exercise or a sort of any modifications after that. That's then a Git pull instead. So what I've got here is I've sort of got a sort of simulation of when you start up your desktop, you make code changes, Then you say git add star, git commit -m message number 1 and push, and then you might shut down your personal computer. And in this column, what I've got is the GitHub status where the changes have been made. And I've got here, I've tried to make this as simple as possible. So let's just say, you've got 3 files, and these changes, when you've made the changes, you've changed one of the files. I'll just paste this just in case anyone's scrambling. Oops, nope. So then what you do, whether you're working on core teaching or your laptop or any other machine, you say git pull, and that will basically bring down any changes from your GitHub or Bitbucket repository. And then you can start making changes. And then once you finish, you add all your changes, git commit message number 2. Then you push those changes up to your Git repository and say shut down your machine. And what I've got here is I've got the most common type of mistake that can be made, and I make this mistake quite often. If there's time, I'll show some of the git commit messages, which are sometimes hilarious. So what can happen is you can sort of start up your desktop where you might be working on core teaching and you forgot to pull. So I'm just simulating you forgot this step. So you make code changes, and what's happening is suddenly there's going to be a conflict because there's one file, and I've designated it by the middle initial. So you're editing on one file, but there's a file that's got updates that you haven't got on your machine. So what's happening is these 2 repositories are now out of sync. And you won't notice anything until you add everything and then try and make a commit. Actually, even at this point, there's no problems. And then as soon as you try git push, what will happen is the problem will suddenly become apparent. The 2 repositories will have a compare, and they'll see that there's some work that's in GitHub that's not on your current machine. And you'll get a message that's very similar to this: conflict detected. You have work on GitHub or your remote repository that has not been pulled to your local machine. So the next step is try not to panic. If you then just do a git pull, and sometimes this step's not necessary. I tend to do it just out of habit, git add star. It'll sometimes say nothing to add. Then try again. Notice these messages are the same. So this is where you are committing the message. So at this stage, the new changes, the old new changes have been integrated. And so your version is now the latest. And then when you do the git push, your Git repository will then be up to date. And what's on your laptop is out of date, but GitHub and this machine are then in sync. And finally, when you start working on your laptop again, when you do the git pull, you'll get both versions pull down to your, well, one version was already there. You'll get the changes you made in commit number 3 pull down, and this really represents where you started, where all 3 were in sync with each other. So first question, Nathan, does that answer your question? And 2, does this make sense to anyone? Or everyone, I should say. And yeah, it can be quite frustrating. So I'm just going to Just trying to see if I can find my Git messages. Actually, I'm just going to, I've got a feeling I've got changes on my core teaching drive that I haven't got here. So, yeah, so I just want to show you, when you click on this message button, you can actually see all the commits that have happened. So these are the commits I've got with the lecture series. And I had a 500 issue. I don't know how that happened. But I'm going to do a pull just to see if there are changes on my repository that I haven't received yet. Okay, so it's fine. Okay. So I did have it's very strange. And when you click on a commit, you can actually see the changes you've made, which is very handy. I'm pretty sure in the last month I was on core teaching and I realized that I hadn't pushed my changes from core teaching up. So I'll actually have to check. I've got a feeling my core teaching version is slightly out of sync with my desktop. So I'll do that afterwards, just in case I make a mess of it on air. So Samuel's saying that you're trying to install the web server from Bitnami and you can't access that site. I'm not aware of that. So I'll just double check that I can access Bitnami. Also, I'll just check that the link is also not out of date. Okay, it looks to me like the website is down. Okay, this is an old site that I often use. Is it down right now? So let's have a little check. Let's say it's up. That's interesting. I'll just check in an incognito window, see if that's a issue. Okay, this is interesting. I'm able to access it here. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. Bitnami's been acquired by a company. That's always a bad sign. Okay, I'm going to change the link. They're obviously doing some reorganizational works. Oh, wait a minute. Why is that not working? So here's MAMP here. This is basically the web server for Mac users. LAMP, I think, is up here. Oh, it's not here. Okay. And WAMP should be down the bottom for Windows users. Oh, this is not in alphabetical order. That's really handy. So there's LAMP, and there's WAMP. So these are the original stacks that made installing a web server on your machine very easy. Not to be confused with the, and I'll just check that that is still running. Yeah, okay, so that at least that one's still running. Okay, Darren, you're saying there's an extra step in the brackets. It's asking for a token before connecting up. Huh. If you can email me that, I haven't seen that before, so that'd be good to know. The other thing you can do is, I'll just open up source tree. So this is the other way to do it, and it means that there's if the plugin's not working, you can install this program called Source Tree, which is made by the same people that make Bitbucket. And oh wait, this is that's another one. Search. So this has also got some nice little buttons, so you can pull. Okay, that's the wrong repository. Hang on a sec. Let me just open the right one. Okay. So I'm just going to press pull. Make sure everything is fine. So recently, what happened was, whenever you make a mistake like this mistake I said here, you'll sometimes get this separate branch. So whenever one gets out of sequence, it actually creates a new branch that you're developing on. So this was, if you like, the original one, and this was the one I was working on. And when I then pull the updates down, it then merged the two branches. But I hadn't actually created a separate branch. It just by making a mistake, forgetting to pull, you actually start to create a new branch unintentionally. And when you then do that pull and push, they get merged back again, and it works quite well. And here's one I did earlier. Updates on a train, error 500 issue. Sometimes my changes get very complicated. This is never intentional. This is just me making a mistake. But I think what happened here, this is where I had a change on core teaching, but I'd forgotten to update it for a while. And when I finally made a merge, more branches than I could really understand just appeared, but they all kind of came together, which was one of those moments where you just say, I don't know what happened, but I'm still alive, and you carry on. Okay, so I think I've got so GitHub have also got their own version. Yeah, GitHub Desktop. This is another one. Just waiting for it to open up. So this is GitHub. It's just opened up and it's got this user reporting changes. Yeah, continue. Similar thing. This is more, it's a bit sexist, but this is more boy designed. It's very square and boxy. Apologies to any male designers out there. Oh, okay. So an updated version is going to come down. So this is the history. So you don't get those nice railway train tracks. You really just get these things. So here's some stray commits, some missing files on May 28th, and yeah. So I had some missing images from the HCI lecture. So they're now in the repository. So again, you can be editing in a code editor, and this will actually keep a track, and you can do the pushing and pulling directly from this program instead. Too many windows open now. My brain is melting. Okay, I'll close that. I do prefer, I'll be honest with you, I do prefer Source Tree because it's very light, but I am quite smitten with Git Kraken. I haven't installed that because I try and limit the number of things I have on my computer. Otherwise, I get very lost. So that's basically the lab, I believe. I'm just checking. That was the last exercise. Oh, no, here we go. Exercise 6. So, yes, so I jumped the gun a little bit. Sometimes you will get a problem, and this this pulling thing, this may not work. So sometimes you just need to try and be aware of which machine has got your most up-to-date code on. And it may be that this machine's got the most up-to-date code in some places, and then your laptop may have some others. Don't think you can't ever do this. And let me get the Git repository open. Did I close that window? Oh no, here it is. So let's just say I'm just going to pick on index.html. There is some conflict in here, and I'll try and find a Okay, so I just Googled this just 2 seconds ago. What you'll have is in your file, you'll see this sort of pattern. And the thing is to look out for this. So you need to look out for something like head, and there'll be one version. Git thinks, well, that could be what you want. Then there'll be these equal signs, and then there'll be this. So it's like option 1 or option 2, and then it will close it off. And sometimes this will be a very long message. So it'll be like a hash of your current version. So all you have to do is you just have to come into your Git repository, just click edit this file. And I'll tell you what, I'll just paste this as an example. So let's imagine that we just had this here, and Git won't let you push or pull. You can just come in and say, well, that's definitely the line I want. So I'm going to delete those 2 lines, and I'm going to delete these lines. And now GitHub or Bitbucket, if you're working on Bitbucket, it knows that this version is the correct version because there's none of that head, equal signs, and footer going on. So it will now, when you then make a commit, so you can make a commit directly here, just type in a message, press commit changes. This file will then be fixed, and everything will be working. But if you have a version on your laptop or desktop that you know is correct, you can just you can do something quite low tech. You can just basically select all your code and copy it, and then come to the same file that's in your Git repository and select all the code, delete it, and paste. I won't commit that, but that's another way. That is another way of resolving what I call a jammed repository. So don't ever feel that you can't do something like that. You don't need to sort of destroy your repository or delete all the files on your computer. You just need to work out which version of the file is correct, and try one of those ways of fixing the thing that's stopping your files from merging. Git's very good if you're making regular commits. So what I recommend is you commit at least, say, once every 2 hours. So if you've done some work and you're getting up to get a coffee or something, just go and just make a push and a merge to say what you were doing, go make your coffee and come back and keep coding. If you're always making small incremental changes, Git will never get confused as to what point you're on. It only gets confused if you make large changes and it's too complex for Git to integrate your previous changes into your current changes. So does that make a lot of sense? I know for myself, since I've been making small micro commits, I rarely get any sort of conflicts, even when I'm working on multiple machines and forgetting to commit regularly. And whilst I'm waiting for your responses, I'll now switch over to the tute where we're actually going to start with some HTML material. Okay, not receiving any response. I'm hoping everyone's fine. Here we go. So So Tim's, you're saying that your htaccess files are installed, but they're not doing their job. Not sure why. They're definitely .htaccess, not just plain htaccess file. So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to have a look at I'm going to have a look at this web page. I'll tell you what, Tim, if you want to stick around at the end, I'm happy to sort of have a look just to see if there's anything that's obvious that I can see in your htaccess file. So I've got this page here. So if we click on this link, we get taken to W3 Schools, which is a very helpful resource for beginners and even intermediate users. And what I've got is, obviously I can't fit the whole page on one, but when you scroll down, you can see that basically there's a, a sort of footer down the bottom. There's even a sort of a breakdown of HTML page structure. So you can compare their page structure with this structure. And interesting, they don't have a navigation menu here. And I suppose the first thing to notice is what you see is you sort of see these big headings and then maybe a subheading. This looks like a slightly smaller version than this heading. And then there's like another heading here, which is smaller again, perhaps H3. And it's often unusual to see anything that goes beyond H3, but sometimes a very technical website will have more than just 3 headings. But 3 is pretty standard, and every now and then you will get 4. So this is something that a human can understand. So a human will see a big heading. A human doesn't need to see that this is H1, but I'm guessing this is a H1 element. And this I'm guessing is a H2. But it's quite easy for humans and search engines alike to be able to start making some kind of a hierarchy. The search engine will see H1, H2, and the human will just happen to see bigger text and slightly less big text than the main. And it's very important to always make sure your headings are always bigger than your main text. Otherwise, it does get confusing for a human. There'll also be paragraphs and anchors, and these kind of round up the sort of original tags that were present in HTML1. And I think there may even be, we've even got a unordered list here. So that's another thing that was in Tim's original web page back in 1989 or 1990. And the one thing that Tim didn't have, Berners-Lee, is images, which we do today. So this is an ad, but that's definitely an example of an image. Now, I've asked a question here, does this website use modern HTML5 contextual elements like header, nav, main, and footer? And if we have a look at, well, they don't actually have it here, but if we look inside their code, we can see that their code is not written in XHTML, or it might be in HTML. Sorry, it might be HTML5, but they're not using modern HTML5 containers. They're using like div class equals W3 container top. So what they've got is something that's more like a custom framework. And this is quite good for them to quickly code up a page, but it's not as easy for modern search engines to sort of index all of these elements, because it's all divs and spans. And what HTML5 is trying to avoid is, and I'm just trying to find the link. Okay, not here. Here we go. So they do have a page dedicated to this and explaining why it's important. So these are examples of non-semantic elements. They tell us nothing about the content, but if you use tags that actually explain the content, it's going to be better going forward. So even though W3 Schools has got a page explaining this and saying why we should be using these elements, if we actually look at the source code, we can see that it's not, certainly at this stage, their code is not HTML5 compliant. They're still using generic div containers and generic spans. So it's a good example of them not doing what they say should be done, if that makes any sense. And feel free to provide me some feedback on that, whether you think it's ironic. I can imagine they're going to update it at some point, but they obviously built this framework before HTML5 came out, and they're like, it's a lot of hard work to sort of fix it. And as Alexander just said, do as I say, not as I do. That's definitely what's going on here. So this is a bit of a trick question. You know, does this website use contextual elements? Pretty much not. So, but if you have a look, there are clues which divs are being used for that purpose, essentially. One interesting thing, when you start to get a website that's getting very complex, so the W3 Schools website, there are two navigation bars. We've got this kind of main navigation bar along the top, and then they've got subsections along the side. So, and when you click on CSS, you'll see these sub navigations that all relate to CSS topics. So these are all the CSS pages, and JavaScript, SQL, if anybody wants to have a go with SQL, and Bootstrap as well. And I think they even have their custom W3 CSS. So they're even sort of giving you a tutorial on using their custom CSS framework, which I'd like you not to do. Just want to make that clear, just in case anyone makes that mistake. But it does help you understand their code a little bit better. So what they're using is essentially they're using markup as style. So they're saying this element has a W3 container class and a W3 teal class. So if you ever change the color of W3 teal, it's going to sort of not really make too much sense. But it's a very different way of programming, and this was very popular in the, I'd say, the mid 2000s to even the really even up to 2015. But things are always changing, and you may find yourself updating a website that's got code like this to something more modern. So I'm asking some questions here about the evolution of the HTML standard. I'm hoping from the lecture, whether you watched the on-campus lecture or my inaccurately labeled TLDR lectures, which I was hoping would be shorter. There was a lot of chaos in the 90s, which is quite a long time ago now. But there's still, sometimes you still see kind of some war memorials, I suppose, in code that arose from those times, or like blown up concrete bunkers on the seashore. And also sometimes when you see things, you'll see things that don't really make sense, but something will work even though it shouldn't be working. And these are all sort of just artifacts of a time where there was chaos. And this is why HTML is generally a very permissive standard. So most browsers, even though your code may not be compliant, a browser will do its best to try and help you out and try and render what it thinks you want it to do. So in some ways it's good. It's easy to hack up a page. But if you have enough errors, just suddenly they'll all stop working. And, you'll think it's the last thing you did, but it's actually, that was just the straw that broke the camel's back, and a lot of things are going wrong. So what this course is trying to do is trying to teach, starting off with a very good HTML5 base, just so that whenever you are editing XHTML, it'll be very unlikely you'll have to edit a HTML4 document, but maintaining XHTML websites is probably a very standard thing to do. And what I've got here is just the summary of things that we're looking for in HTML5, and making things easier for both search engines and also humans alike, rather than having plugins or third-party plugins. So Adobe Flash Player is becoming less and less relevant because more browsers are implementing some of the web standards that weren't implemented as standard in the past. And one thing that I'm very proud of with HTML5, in HTML4, we were able to make these sort of shortcuts. We could say, we could just say checked if we wanted a checkbox to be checked and have a tick in it. And XHTML, we had to say checked equals checked in quotes. And we don't have to do that anymore. We can just use the word checked, and the browsers are required to recognize that as being equivalent to checked equals checked, or something equals true. So are there any questions regarding, say, these sort of three general standards? So this is, as I said, becoming very much like ancient history. There's still a lot of XHTML out there, but HTML5 is becoming slowly more and more dominant. But as you can see with W3 schools, they haven't quite made the transition from XHTML to HTML5. Yes, Alexander, yeah, Chrome, I think that's just a recent thing, isn't it? That's been happening in the last 6 months. Flash is now blocked by default. I do miss Flash. I will say that developing Flash web pages was a lot of fun. But yes, it's kind of all boring and texty these days. Because I know this blocking was on the cards But I'd actually lost track of when it was going to happen. So the next activity, HTML body elements. So these elements go inside the body element. And please make a note, header. This is a common mistake. Some people put the header inside the head tag. It's actually part of the body. So it's if it's on the web page, it should be on the web page. So make sure you don't make that mistake. And another mistake that can be made is not shown here, but the footer tag can often be put outside the body. The footer tag also goes inside the body. So just moving my code back here. So we have body and then header, then the navigation, then the main, and finally the footer down here. So this is the structure I've sort of started you off with. And also I strongly recommend that you you stick with this kind of structure as well. So I'm going to ask maybe a couple of the some of the trickier ones. So I say here a hyperlink. This is a paired tag because you have an opening tag and a closing tag and some content in the middle. And also it's like an inline element, but these days, as of HTML5, it can also wrap around a block. So if you want a block element to be a clickable link, you can actually put it inside a hyperlink tag. But in the past, the rule has been that inline elements should be able to go inside block elements, but block elements should not go inside inline elements. So this is why I've got the hyperlink as a sort of as both an inline and a block element. I might as well raise it now. The form element also behaves in this way. So you can have a very small form that's inline on your web page. So it can be just a simple button with a hidden field inside. But you can also wrap, a large section of your page, which has got many form fields in it. You can, so for the same reason, the form element can either be quite small in inline or quite big and wrap around a lot of elements, just like the hyperlink is now allowed to. So I do have a question. So the BR element, so this is like a line break element. I wouldn't mind just seeing what you guys think. Is it a paired or empty element? And is it an inline or is it a block element? I'll just pour myself a little top-up drink. So Tim's saying an empty block element, not paired. That's good. Aramith is saying inline, which is opposite to what Tim just said. I should clarify that. I'm actually drinking grapefruit juice and soda stream. So I was aware, I was thinking, oh, this is going to sound totally sus. So BR has always been an empty element. So in XHTML, we had to have a slash just there. And a common mistake some students will have is they'll say BR and then close it with a BR, like a slash BR. And what you get is you actually get two line feeds, because what the browser's saying is, oh, a closing BR tag, that doesn't exist. I guess they want another BR tag. So this is just an example of what can go wrong. So the browser makes a best guess as to what it thinks you want. So Tim's worked it out. Even though the break tag, it actually puts in a line break, you can be tempted in thinking that it's a block element, but it's actually in line. It sort of moves in line. It just happens to push content onto the next line. So a block element generally goes from one side of the page to another. And I'll just pull up that lecture slide. Just make this. I'll just pull up the correct slide. So if I click on this div, you can see that the button there. Okay, you can see that it's in purple. The block goes from the leftmost side to the rightmost side of its parent element. Whereas when you come to any inline elements, they start somewhere and they can break and go on to the next line. But essentially, they don't span the whole left and right side of the parent. Oh, congratulations, Tim. I'm glad to hear you've had some success with HD access. Was it something obvious that maybe some other students might like to know about, or is it just too embarrassing to mention? Now there's another similar tag, the HR tag. So this is the horizontal rule tag. It draws a nice line on your page. So Timothy's saying you pushed and it worked. That's very interesting. It may have been a cached version. This does happen occasionally, that a page won't come through. The server will be hanging onto that page longer than it should. This can even happen locally, which is very frustrating. So you can be developing on your laptop with a fake web browser, a fake web server, so to speak, and even that local web server won't provide you with the content. It can be frustrating at times. Okay, Darren's saying it's an inline element. Yeah, so the HR tag, it's a single element, so there's no closing HR. If you do have a /HR, you'll get two lines. But this is a block element because it does go from one side of the screen to the other. So as I said, by default, we can actually play around with these styles, which I'll be showing you very soon. Input elements, these are inline as well. So you can have a label in front of a input element, so say a text field or something, and the input is then sort of inline. It's more of an inline block element because text field won't normally break. So it won't be going to the end of the line and then coming onto the next line. So more accurately, you might call it an inline block element. So it's got the benefits of being both an inline element and staying together. So like an internally block element. Okay, Darren, thanks for Thanks for checking that up. I was very worried about the HR element being an inline element there. Now, one thing, ordered list elements, these are block elements, but LI elements are also block elements. So if you ever check what an LI element is doing, just so, for example, this is an unordered list, and you can come down into the inspector, skip over console. If you come down to this little box model, you can see that it's going from one side of the screen to the other. So not only is the UL a block, its children are also block elements as well. And I've got another little question here. How are div and span similar? And also, how are they different? So I'll get some of your answers in the chat to this question. So yeah, that's a good answer, Aramith. A div is a block, a span is an inline, so that's what makes them different. And I will definitely say that's true for, say, a chunk of text. I could definitely say that's true of an inline element. Like it would be a really big chunk of text if it's a div element. You can add an ID to both, that's true. The clue can be found on the W3 page. I'll just go back to what they said. Here we go. So I'm getting a lot of good answers here, grouping elements together. So, that's definitely, I would say, more true of the block element than the span element. I think span should be closed. So Miroslav, I think, because otherwise it will just assume that the rest of the page is inside that span. But the one thing is, div and span are technically generic, so they're very good in sort of like clear wrapping, like clear skin, if using a wine analogy. It tells us nothing about the content, but it is a convenient container to put things in. So we can pop in a class or an ID later and either style it or, using JavaScript, even change its contents. So in assignment 2, the assignment is going to be building a cinema website. And one thing you'll have to do is to change the inner HTML, i.e. what's inside a paired element, so between the tags of a paired element, and update that content with either error messages or even pricing information. So it provides us with a convenient way of sort of flagging a little area. And even in the lecture notes, I was doing that. Whenever I clicked on an element, one of those spans, it would turn purple. And that's because I'm using those spans to find a section of text and highlight it. Mind you, I will just continue. Miroslav has raised an important point. Even though it is, I can't stress how strongly it's encouraged for you to close elements, paired elements. The standard does allow for sloppy coders to, if you're writing list elements, you can just open a list element, and if you don't close it, a browser is designed to allow you to just keep coding. So I'm going to move this code back into the window. So let's just say I was too lazy for whatever reason, and I just only typed in this code, li and the hyperlink. And then I don't know, just got lazy and didn't bother typing this. And as soon as I start typing this, a HTML5 compliant browser is required to recognize that that is a new list element. It's not a list element inside another list element. So that's a little quirk. It encourages bad programming, in my opinion. I think that's probably not wise. And also paragraphs. Paragraphs are paired elements. And if you forget to close the paragraph, or you're just too lazy, when it sees another tag that is a block element, generally, it recognizes that it's not to be part of this paragraph. So that's another thing that can happen. It's a little bit unfortunate, and a student a few periods ago pulled me up when I said, oh no, it is definitely required. He just pointed out in the standard that it wasn't. Because up to then, my line was that all the sensible shortcuts that HTML4 had are allowed in HTML5, but none of the stupid ones are. And unfortunately, this is one of the stupid ones that is allowed. So I don't really understand why it's a good thing. It can make maybe programming slightly simpler if you're automating list element output, but yeah, it's not something I'd encourage you on taking advantage of. Andres, yes, it is definitely possible to list elements, to nest list elements, and I'll show you an example of that. Let me grab, nope, not that one. So I'm just pulling back my assignment marking page. These are list elements inside another list element. So what you have is you have your UL. Can I make the font larger? Yep. So I've got list elements in this one. This one doesn't have a submenu. Oh, I tell a lie. It does. So what you do is you then put in another UL inside, and then you've got a list inside a list element. And I might change that to OL just to see if this works. So I'm breaking. You can sort of see what's going on here. because I'm only styling unordered lists to be hidden when there's no hover state, you can now see that this is an ordered list. There should be numbers here. I'm not sure why they're not appearing. Let me just check. This is curious. I was expecting that style to be active. I was hoping to see numbers here, but it's not working, unfortunately. Mhm. No, not today. So yes, it's very simple. You just pop in you've got your list element, and at some point you just pop in an ordered list or an unordered list, and it goes back. So normally what you'd see is you just see basically indentation and sub dots. Yeah, that's perfect, Andres. That's exactly how it goes. And I'm just checking this. Yeah, this is the final exercise of the tute. So now the table tag is very controversial. And has anyone heard any anecdotes saying never use a table element in a web page? I just want to see if anyone's heard that advice. So Darren says he has. So has Matthew. So I'm putting up the table element now. Never unless it's an actual table. um, yeah, so it's one of these things that a table has a semantic meaning. So if it's actually a table with tabular data inside it, a table element is perfectly fine. So as long as a human and a search engine is reading the document and it's it's definitely a table, it's still allowed. Now the problem is, in the past, tables were used to create a web page, and the reason why they were used was because it was one of the most reliable methods of getting sort of alignment and layout correct in web pages, even through to about 2010, because CSS had a couple of niggles that just meant that things weren't quite in alignment. For the most part, CSS3 has fixed things, and there is a new CSS grid and CSS flow element, which we will be looking at in coming weeks. Just not too much because it is new material, and new material has to get approved. But in your assignments, you may notice that I've provided you with a grid layout that does something that a table element won't. So before we do this exercise, I just want to show you that So I'm just going to the dummy page, which is really big. Actually, I'll just have this big at the moment. So you'll see that there's like if you like, this would be a traditional table heading on the left, and then a TD or a table data cell on the right. So a TH element and a TD element. And a table would just basically squash, and then okay, I thought this was going to switch to a single layout, but I realize it's not going to do that. So this is a modern grid element. Okay, saying goodbye to Lockie. So this is a grid element, and we do have more control over the layout. So I've got this column to be set, and then this column gets shorter. But using media queries, I can actually then squash this to a single page layout, which is one of the advantages of HTML5 and CSS3. Using media queries, we can sort of detect the size of the screen and swap into, say, a mobile-friendly view. But on other devices, we can go into a sort of more broad layout and have it stretching across the screen. So this is one thing that table elements won't let you do simply. So even if it is the correct container for the purpose, it's just one thing to be aware of, that a table element may not look good in your mobile website. So a grid layout is often something that's a bit more flexible. So Tim says he's playing with Flexbox. So if anyone is playing with Flexbox and Gridbox, and you're thinking, oh, what's the difference between grid and flex? Quite simply, grid is better for two-dimensional layout. So if it's definitely going to be a 2D layout, I recommend grid. But if it's sort of more a one-dimensional layout, and the columns don't have to line up, then the flex layout has got a couple of things the grid layout doesn't allow you to do. So there are teams out there that say flex is definitely the best one. Other teams that say grid is the best one. I often think that depending on what you're doing in the page, sometimes a mix of both is the optimal path to take. But I will say, I do think grid has the edge. If you're going to learn one, I'd stick with grid. But that's not to say that flex is a distant second. It's definitely very close. So when you see a table, generally there'll be cells which are heading cells. So in this case, this is a sort of a heading cell, as is this side and this side. So each row is basically, you've got your table and your TRs. TRs are usually second. And then inside rows, you'll have TH and TD elements. And Darren's saying Flexbox Froggy. I'll have to, I'll definitely have a look at that. So even though it won't be quite obvious, the background won't be colored different color. Usually the text is in a bolder font, the default style. But you can style THs and TDs. So those are the heading cells and the data cells to be different. So I've given this one sort of darker background. So a table, cells can span more than one column. So in this one, this row, the single cell in this row is actually spanning 3 columns. So it needs to have col span of 3. And it can be a little bit tricky because it's going in the row. You think row span, but it's actually spanning columns. So just be careful of that. And I've got these heading cells which are spanning rows. So they're going down in a column, but spanning the rows. Getting a lot of good links here. I might harvest some of this for the advanced topic in discussions. And so in order to do that, try and build this. So the first thing to note is that it's basically a 3x7 table. Sorry. Yeah, that's correct. So it's got three columns and 7 rows. And once you work that out, then you can basically knock into the next row, sorry, the next column by increasing the column span. One little quirk, when you're pushing down, it actually pushes the other cells to the right. So when you're doing a row span, basically you'll see an extra cell pop out here. And so you'll have to then delete that cell in order to get rid of it. But my way, whenever I'm making a complex table, is to just build the basics and then do the row spans and the col spans, and then delete any cells which are in the wrong place. Another thing that is not necessary, but I strongly recommend that you do if you ever create a table, is to pop any sort of major headings into the T head element, and any sort of footer cells into the T foot element, and put the main body of your table into the T body tag. And there's a really good plugin. So I'll just bring this page back. I'll just see if anyone's fixed their pages since we've been talking. So it was on 59 out of 108. So what I've got here is I've actually got a table of students. And I've got a little plugin. So if we have a look, it's just doing a bit of a refresh at the moment. So what we've got is we've got the table headings. So just those cells are in the table headings. The table foot, that's the table body. And the table foot is right down the bottom. So these are all in the table foot tag. So I, just by clicking on these columns, so if I want everybody's name to be in alphabetical order, I can just click on this. This is a plugin. This is not by default, but the designer of the plugin has designed it so the table body can be sortable, which is very handy. And then if I want to see, you know, who's done a really good job and got all the media present, I can do this. And anyone who's missing 1 or 2 images, I can see straight away. And then finally, I can see who's got no images in the right place at the moment. And the good thing is the T head and the T foot is not affected by the sorting. It's only the T body element that's affected by this sorting. So that's just one tip. If you do have good, well-structured code in T head, T body, and T foot elements, you can install this handy plugin that makes your table sortable. So I do put this note here saying, please use the CSS grid layout if you're just using a layout rather than using tables, because the structure of tables is inflexible, and I think I can show that. I'm just too good at Coda. So if you can imagine, if this is a mobile view, not only do I have to scroll up and down, but I also have to scroll left and right, which is not so friendly on a mobile. So that's pretty much today's chat. I really was hoping to have assignment 2 approved and introduced, but I'll definitely be crying if it's not approved by the end of this week. But just to give you a bit of a heads up, it's going to be a cinema website, so you might want to start thinking about a small cinema website business. A single screen, so not multiple screens, just a single screen, only one movie playing at a time, and it only plays 4 movies because they've only got one screen, and so you don't have to worry about the name. I've got a name for you. So just start looking for images if you finished assignment 1, some images of some small town cinemas, and maybe think about some think maybe some creative writing about how you would advertise such a business on their website. The website will be a single page at this stage. It is, Tim. So basically, the bulk of the assignment will be on a single page. There will be a second page in assignment 4, but that will be a receipt page. So that's only because it looks very different. So it's going to be like a tax invoice page that the user can print out imaginarily on A4 letterhead. And all you have to do to check that out is just go into print preview mode. But there'll be no setting up multiple pages in this assignment. So just in the remaining time available, I'll take queries. Now, Tim, you said you fixed the HT access problem. So is anyone else having problems with assignment 1 that they'd like me to have a look at? Okay, so Matthew, yeah, I can definitely have a look at your assignment 1. Matthew, I'm just having trouble finding a Matthew Wilson in the class list. That's definitely your surname. I haven't got that wrong. Oh, hang on. Matthew with one T. Sorry. Such a rookie mistake. What did I do with that page? Okay. Okay, so yeah, all the pages seem to be there. You've removed the deprecated code sample. That's good. So that's showing well. And your images all look the right size as well. So that looks like a 5 and a 5. I'm not checking the GitHub or Bitbucket component. So make sure you've got 2 commits. And if you're not using a standard repository, make sure you register that repository. So Alexander, let me just check. So I've got avatar. I'm just opening in a new image. I think I know what might be going on. So there's no avatar.png, but I'm guessing. No, there's no avatar JPEG either. Can you just check the name of your profile pic? It should be avatar.png. I'm talking to Alexander there. Oh, it's saying forbidden, so you may not have 604. Sorry, I'm not reading it correctly. It's saying forbidden, so you just need to give it 604 file permission. So Robert, you just going backwards through the list. So Robert, you're saying, do you need to delete the deprecated code sample? Yeah, the idea is that pages shouldn't have deprecated code in the page. If I suppose commenting out, it's one of the things that's recommended in introduction to programming, that unless a comment is there for a reason, it's a good idea to remove it just for to declutter a page. So I suppose if it's I don't know, I'll leave it up to you, but the plan was to remove the code. So so Tim's twigged. Yeah, the avatar image needs to be called avatar.png. And to Alexander, it should be 604. If you have 644, it means your classmates can steal that image. Might not be such a big issue to have media on 604, 644. I shouldn't really say this, but if you were to go searching through other people's directories, something you should never do, but if you did, sometimes you'll see a frustrated student has set their permissions to 777, just trying to get something to work, and just left it on 777, which means anyone can go in and not only read but write to their files. So just with permissions, always be over cautious than under cautious. So 604 is more cautious than 644. Yeah. So Tim, the idea is that what you would do is just in an image editor, and I'm just giving you some experience of resizing an image and saving in a different format. So just find that Snoopy image and just save a version of it called avatar.png, and then it will show. And the other thing about the spinning wheel, don't worry about that too much. That's because the index.php file is not there. I'm really only interested in the A2 holding page being there for assignment 1 and all the images. As you develop your assignment, you'll be copying your A2 work over to A3 and then your A3 work over to A4. So I really just need one assignment under construction page. If you want to have all 4, please go ahead, but it's only necessary for marking to have one set up. Okay, good to hear you're back online, Alex. I'll just double check. Still getting a forbidden. I'll hit shift refresh. That often fixes things. No. Yeah, so I've got the other images are coming through. Oh, sorry, I misread that. I thought you said you'd fixed up the web page. Okay. Just close some of these windows. Okay, so just coming up to 20 to 10. So if there are no more questions, I'll close tonight's chat. So I'll just give you 10 seconds to do a frantic typing. Okay, so let's just check Alex. Oh, damn. Just hit refresh by mistake instead of go. Okay, so hi Alex. Okay, I can see an image. You've called it capital A avatar.png. So it's got to be lowercase. Unix is case sensitive. So if you just change the capital A to a little a, it should be working. And thanks, Darren. That'd be excellent. Please post. I think it's advanced topics, or even in the CSS. Actually, I think this would probably be really good in the CSS discussion for any. Oh no, maybe advanced. I don't know. I'll let you guys work that out. Okay, so I'm going to close tonight. I'll stick around and just maybe chat in the chat window and just wait for everyone to leave. So I'll say good night. Hopefully, assignment 2 will pop up in the next day or so, and I'll see you all next week once I've worked out that Wednesday is still the preferred time slot for everyone to attend.